Welcome to the 2026 Homegrown Concert Series at the American Folklife Center at the Library of Congress. My name is Steve Winick. For 50 years, the American Folklife Center has been bringing the best of traditional music and dance right here to the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. It is now May, which is Jewish American Heritage Month, and we are very excited to finally have Lily Henley in our concert series. Lily is one of the rising stars in what we would call Sephardic music. She sings in Ladino, which is the language of Sephardic Jews. So, Lily, welcome to our concert series, and thank you for this interview.
It's such a massive honor. Thanks so much for having me.
So, you've had a really interesting upbringing, background. You traveled a lot as a youth. So, tell us just a little bit about, set the stage a little bit.
Well, I guess in the quick version, I just moved a lot as a kid. I think I lived in maybe 7 states before I turned 10. And I lived in several countries before I graduated from high school. I was homeschooled until 10th grade, but I did spend short periods of time in school systems in varying states. I was born while my parents were living on the Hopi Indian reservation with the Hopi tribe, and so I spent my first few years and several years after that going back regularly. And I also lived in Alaska in a traditional Inuit village and in Kodiak, and then just across a lot of the Southwest, some of the Midwest, the Northeast. So I sort of have had a bit of an itinerant upbringing until I graduated.
Amazing. And during that time, at some point, you became aware of this Sephardic Jewish heritage, which is not that common even among American Jews. So when did you first start to realize you had something special there?
Well, I grew up knowing that part of our family was Sephardi. I'm not like a lot of people in the Sephardi community. There's not, obviously most people know that most Jewish people in the United States are Ashkenazi. Right. There is a Sephardic community across several different cities and different states, depending on the population. But unlike some younger people, I didn't grow up with a Turkish grandmother. My family's been in the United States for over 100 years. My understanding is that my dad's Sephardic heritage comes from a Portuguese community that came via Germany. It's challenging, but I did grow up, partly because of my dad and my mom, knowing about our Sephardic heritage, and with a lot of music in Ladino in our house. My mom kind of made a point of having, I had a lot of the classic recordings. I absolutely knew what Ladino was, and that Ladino was separate from, I didn't think of it as ancient Spanish or something like that. I understood that it was a separate Jewish language, and I grew up singing in it and in Hebrew. And it really was just something that I did with my family. It was a central part of my identity and something that I did at home with my family, and that years later, I started tapping into as a professional musician.
Yeah, great. Yeah. Explain a little bit, just because not all of our viewers will know, what actually Ladino is, how Ladino came to be.
The way that I describe it, the way that I love to think about it, is that it's sort of a linguistic geography of the Sephardi diaspora. One of the things that's least understood about Ladino is that it actually it's not originating in Spain. It is based in the languages that were spoken in Spain and Portugal before 1492, but it actually developed in the Ottoman Empire and neighboring places. At the time, I think that empire lasted for 600 years. After the Spanish and Portuguese Inquisitions, when Sephardi, or what are now thought of as Sephardi people, entered what is now North Africa, the southern Mediterranean, and the Middle East, kind of all the way over to maybe Syria, all of that area was part of the Ottoman Empire, and so they took the languages that they were speaking, which were kind of these very older forms. We call it Castellano, older forms of Spanish and Portuguese and Catalan, and it combined both with Hebrew, which maybe was part of it at the time. I'm not a linguist, and also with Ottoman languages. So it has, pieces of Turkish and pieces of Arabic and Persian. If you look at a Ladino dictionary, there'll be root words from Old Italian and Old French, and even Bulgarian and Greek. So it's really a language that kind of charts this massive diaspora into the Ottoman Empire and to the creation of Sephardi culture.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so were your first experiences with Ladino on those recordings that your parents had, or was it singing that you first
Yeah,
heard?
singing and music have been my very first entrance into the language. And I had like both more modern recordings, like recordings of Flores Jagoda, who's, was a NEA fellow and lived, here in Washington, D.C., and was a great songwriter of many, many songs, and spoke a dialect of Ladino that was freely from the Balkan area. She said certain words a certain way that we can tell. But I also had some older recordings, and then recordings by newer artists. Like my favorite is Jacques and Janet Assim, who are a duo from what is now Istanbul. They actually speak Ladino and make really beautiful music that's very influenced by Turkish folk music. Because Ladino is really, the language and the music is really a linguistic, a lyric tradition and not a instrumental tradition. Yeah.
So you mentioned singing and playing with your family. Are there other musicians in your family? Was it a musical upbringing in general?
The family is very musical. Like my parents really love music. They're huge music fans. They both sing really well. My sister is also a really amazing singer and also a harp player, but no one in my family is a professional musician. It was I just thought everybody sang all the time with their parents. So we just sang a lot. And actually I sort of have, for like the public consumption, I have kind of my own little thing that I do right around Hanukkah every year where I try to record one song just to my social media that shows how much beautiful Hanukkah music there is, and so I've got several videos that I've forced my shy family members into, where I'm kind of singing the main part, but my mom is like trying to get out of the frame on the side, but she sings beautifully, and so we just would sing together, and there were a lot of songs in Ladino and then also in Hebrew and biblical Hebrew that we would sing that are also from the Sephardic, like liturgical tradition.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting. So, given that, how did you start to be more sort of serious and professional about the music side, like, or in terms of music education? Did you study directly, or was it more just with a social group?
Like Sephardic music particularly, or just music?
I mean, I know that you did other music before you got that, into Sephardic music. So in music in general.
I mean, I'd say that I really think of myself as a folk musician. So even though I did eventually go to conservatory for my undergrad, I went to the New England Conservatory, to this program that they've had for a long time that's for improvising musicians, neither jazz nor classical music. I'm really a folk musician, so I'm trained by ear. I am a fiddle player, and that was sort of my first, instrument with a pedagogy. So singing was never something that I took lessons. I've had very few vocal lessons, but I sang all the time, and my ears were always developing. But the way that I really got into performing Sephardic music was, at some point I was at, teaching or doing something at like some kind of a fiddle camp. I've spent my whole life going to fiddle camps, and there was some kind of a night where we were asked to bring something different to the student concert or something, and I thought it'd be fun to do like one of those songs from my family with fiddles and do that kind of thing. So I did that, and it had a huge impact. I feel like I didn't understand. Like, it was just always something that I knew. I've always been very, very, for lack of a better word, nerdy about language and culture and like where things come from and the stories and the history and like the kind of the respect that you need to have for those lineages. And it just did not dawn on me how touching this music would be to people. And then it just became like, it was like a rabbit hole that I went down. And then, I don't know, I could talk about how I really got into making my album and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's a good question. So if someone is interested in this music, where do you go for Ladino repertoire these days? So
this is for me, it has been the biggest conundrum. So basically how I did it was that I was kickstartering a totally unrelated album. And I got really exhausted from posting silly things online like we do. And I just started like recording like little clips of of Ladino songs, a lot of them traditional that I knew. And then at some point I had made some new melodies to old songs.
Yeah.
And I was very for some reason felt very nervous presenting them in any kind of a public way, because I thought, somebody needs to tell me if this is okay to do, because it's a tradition and it's a history. And I understood that it's an endangered language and that the culture is endangered. And I understood that because some of it has felt inaccessible to me earlier. And so I did post this, I made this really cool video of this song with a completely new melody. It had like a fiddle tune in the middle of it. And I got this really unexpected and kind of just insane email from the vice president of Aquí Estamos, which is the main Ladino language and Sephardic revitalization organization in Paris. Mm-hmm. And he said, we love this thing that you're doing. We want to invite you to headline the Ladino Day in Paris. And I'd like you to be on my label. He has like a Sephardic record label and publishing company. Mm-hmm. And I want you to make this an album. And that is something that for even any folk musician would be like, what is happening?
Right,
and also on top of that, for it to be entirely in an endangered Jewish language. Yeah. So I went there, made an album of all new, and had the chance to collaborate with really important linguists in the Sephardic mm-hmm. language revitalization movement. So I wrote songs with Marie-Christine Borns-Varol, who's she's written the most important textbook of the last 2 decades for Ladino, and I had a chance to go over. I visited Susanna Weishahak, who's an important ethnomusicologist for the collection of Sephardic music for the last 60 years probably. So I had these incredible experiences, and I made this album, and through that I discovered, unrelated to the music itself, a whole world of Ladino revitalization, of older and younger people that are native speakers, of people that are fluent speakers that are meeting online. We have Encuentros de Al-Had, which is every Sunday on Al-Had. That's the way we say Sunday. Right. We have a program with sometimes hundreds of people mm-hmm. viewing a Ladino interview. There's the Ladino Comunidad, which is a community listserv where we can write, it's only in Ladino, and you are corrected if you mess up the language. In the United States, there's the American Ladino League. All of these things have been very inaccessible to a lot of musicians that are outside the community that haven't had. So that, for me, often is why, you hear Ladino, it's presented as if it's part of an ancient medieval music tradition, or it's something like that. But there is this whole world of revitalization, and because of the internet, it's becoming more and more accessible, I think.
Right. Well, you mentioned Paris, and you did have a Fulbright there as well, to study all of that stuff. And you worked very closely with a Sephardic community in Paris. Tell us about that community.
All of that happened through this album. I had thought about getting a Fulbright. I thought about applying to the Fulbright for a decade. And then I had this incredible experience where I met all these important people in the Paris community. And of course, in France, I don't want to say most, but a very large percentage of Jewish people are Sephardi, just because of where immigration happened. So the way that we meet Jewish people in the United States, and they're often Eastern European, or from that heritage. In Paris, it's very common to meet somebody whose family came from Algeria or from Turkey or from... and so I met all kinds of people, including really important native Ladino speakers. And in Paris, there's this program at the INALCO, the Institute there for Language and Culture, Minority Language and Culture, where it's a long collegiate level course in Ladino. And I thought, wow, if I ever have somehow time off, that would be amazing. And then the pandemic happened. My album was delayed. Right. I was stuck inside in New York City, and I thought, now's my chance. I'm going to apply to the Fulbright. It's very uncommon to apply to the Fulbright, especially in France, without an institution, but I did it myself. And I received it, and I got to spend really a whole year as an artist living in Paris, studying Ladino at a really collegiate level, and spending time with different people in that scene, and really hearing the language and learning different songs, and creating new music in a way that made me feel much more sure of myself that I could actually create something new, and it could be both really new and true to myself, and at the same time honoring and root digging in what is alive and recent and real within Sephardic culture and language.
Yeah. Cool. So let's talk about that a little. Like, what is your approach to creating new music for a Sephardic, a set of Ladino lyrics?
So a lot of it is very instinctive. The main thing is that I don't like to sing too much in languages that I don't understand, so I am regularly working on my Ladino and speaking with people and having the chance to like really be in conversation, focusing on the actual language, studying cultural things. Some of them are things that come from my childhood, and some of them are like real, deep dives when you're a member, a younger person in a minority and endangered cultural situation. And Sephardic culture is so endangered, partly because of, the end of the Ottoman Empire that caused some migration, and then the Holocaust, which, huge communities of Ladino speakers in the Balkans perished, and the speakers in other countries that were not touched by the Holocaust were forced out. Right. And then a lot of people learned Hebrew and, did not, or learned any other language. Some people went to South America and they learned Spanish and they stopped speaking. So some of it is like deep dives into things that sometimes the people themselves are like, well, this is interesting that this young person is so obsessed, wants to know this. I don't really think it's that cool, So some of it is this deep research kind of thing that I've always been doing. Every folk genre that I'm really attached to, I've done really deep work trying to understand the language and the stories and the history and the context. So that's part of it. And then some of it is just knowing the traditional versions of the songs, whatever traditional is. Most songs that are in Ladino, there are none that are as old as people like to say they are. They're not from the Middle Ages, really. But specifically, the melodies are almost always newer, even if the lyrics do come from an older tradition and aren't super recent. The melodies will be older. Sometimes there's more than one. So I'll be learning the traditional melodies, knowing the song as it was sung by various singers, like, from the turn of the 1900s, like the Blumenthal brothers collected, and Chaim Effendi, you can hear him, his version of A la una nació. And then I think to myself, does this melody work for me? Because I do sing some traditional songs in my concerts, but sometimes it just feels like it needs a different life to be part of my repertoire. And then I'll just be entering the words to the point where a new melody just comes to me. And the best melodies come, I can't remember writing them. They just happen. Yeah. And then suddenly they exist. And it's as if they're part of it. And the most touching thing for me is lately, in the last year, a lot of Jewish artists have sent me recordings and videos of themselves, and also random people that like singing in Spanish have sent me versions of my songs. And there's nothing more touching, even if they like aren't pronouncing it right or whatever. It's just like so beautiful, because that is how folk music continues. There was a point at which the old melodies that we know of as traditional were new, and they have changed, and there are certainly melodies that we no longer have access to that people used to sing. So for me, it's like, as long as the language is right, I know what I'm singing, I feel connected to the song, I understand its story, I understand where the words came to us from. Ladino does not have instrumental specific tradition. We've always borrowed from neighboring styles, so it feels very natural to borrow from American music, from all the genres of folk music that I've been enmeshed in, and to write new songs that are sometimes pulling from places that, yes, there are older people in my community of Ladino speakers that are like, I still really like the old version of that. But they know that my approach to the song is deep and honoring, and that the language that I'm singing in is correct. And so then it just becomes a matter of, do you like this melody, or you like this melody?
No, it's interesting, because when people have a lot of previous experience with the music, they have the melodies that they love.
Right.
But you're presenting it often to audiences that have no preconceptions.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, so you're
Which
presenting
is
it
like
for a different group. Yeah.
And that can be a burden. Like it can feel like, not a burden, but it can feel like, okay, I want to present some traditional, some melodies that are from the tradition, because I don't want people to think, I want people to understand that this is a new thing that I'm doing, and that not all of it is the way that you would have heard Sephardic music in 1900 or 1850 or whenever. But I just don't think that a language and a music can survive entirely by reproducing some version of the past. And I also would not be the ideal person to do that. There are people that are the ideal person to do that, and that have done it or that are continuing to do it. And for me, creating new things while really being enmeshed and invested and obsessed with the culture that I'm coming from is sort of the thing that I can offer, I guess.
And what about writing new lyrics? That must be a challenge in, what is a third, fourth language for you, yeah? Totally.
My feeling about it is that there's two ways that I do it. Sometimes I adapt things, not just like, it's one thing when you do something like we as, musicologists call it contrafacta, when you take the whole entire lyric and you stick a new melody on it. But sometimes I'm taking something that really has never had music, and I'm just adapting it into something, and I'm writing out from there. Sometimes I'm writing completely new songs, and in those cases, I just think it's very important to co-write with somebody who has a deeper poetic connection to the language. And it's really not about that you could not write alone, but when you're really writing poetry, when you're trying to express something, idiom and intimacy with a language becomes so much deeper and more complex. And when in the beginning, it was like a necessity. That's how I needed to do it. Now, I could do it in any number of ways, but I love to do it best that way. Even if I create something, I like to send it to a collaborator and say, what do you think? Should I have used even something so small as like, is the bird I chose for this line, does that sound right? What do you think? Do you think that bird works in this? Or do you think maybe we should have a crow instead of a dove? Or, and it just helps me connect to something intangible in the memory within language. It's like if you're working with an older person who grew up in a no longer existent Ladino-speaking environment, they might bring just a bit of poetry into your lyric that you don't have access to as a younger person that's trying to find it again. And that is really true of endangered Jewish culture, and it's true about, people that are working in threatened languages all over the world.
Sure.
Yeah.
Amazing. So that brings us to, you mentioned that that typically Ladino music and Sephardic music has borrowed the musical structures of the countries that the diaspora existed in. So you're doing something similar. Your arrangements tend to feature Duncan, who's really well versed in Appalachian music and in Celtic music.
Yeah.
And you too have a background in both of those forms. So how does that resonance work between those traditions?
Oh, I mean, I'm sure there is some older person that's come to my concerts and been like, this doesn't work at all. But I think that it's all about how immersed you really are in something. Like if it all comes back to language. If it's a language that you really know and that you've delved into enough that you can now produce something original in it, and the sounds feel authentic and you can hear them before, then it feels very natural. And that's what I ask myself, does this feel forced? And a really good example of this is that there was this ballad, obviously there's this collection of ballads, a child ballad collection.
Right.
There was this ballad, it doesn't even matter. It's from this trope that appears in ballads all over the world where it's called the night visitor trope, where the man knocks on the window and the woman says, I can't let you in, my mom's down the hall, and he convinces her and he comes in and they have like a tryst in the night, and then she says, well, now you're gonna marry me. And he says, absolutely not, goodbye. And I had tried to write a version that was the opposite story, where the same thing happened, but it was the man who wanted to marry.
Right.
And the woman was like, that was fun, but not that fun, you know? And it just did not work well in English. Like, I wrote the whole thing and I really loved the melody that I'd come up with, and it was very much in this. And then when I was working on my album, I translated it with Marie-Christine Borns-Varol. We translated it and we were laughing in her salon. I've almost only spoken to her in Ladino, so we were just talking in Ladino. And she was like, I was like, don't you think that this kind of, there's a lot of empowered, it's not that Ladino is a women's language, but there's a side of the song traditions that were sung by men, that are like more liturgical, and then there's a repertoire of music that was sung more often by women. And there's a lot of like very independent female characters or just interesting perspectives that women have had in Sephardic songs in Ladino. And I said, do you think this kind of works in Ladino in a way that it doesn't work in English? And she thought so also. Like, we both felt we found an angle for this song, and I recorded it. It's like somewhere down in my album. It's called, it means it's Tonight I'll Love You in Ladino. Mm-hmm. Esta noche te amaré. And it just, it was one of those situations of creating something that came really from my immersion in this other tradition and just made sense in this.
Made more sense in Ladino than it seemed to make in English, which is really interesting. Yeah. So let's talk specifically about your album, Horas Desahoradas.
Horas Desahoradas, yeah. Which is kind of, I don't think it's an old school idiomatic phrase, but it basically means, it was a translation of a timeless clock, or hours without hours. Basically that time, how time feels when it's passing really slowly or really quickly, depending on whether you're just so tedious or you're really excited and something's happening and you're having a good time. So that's what it's named after. Yeah, and it's almost entirely in Ladino. I think there's one verse in English on one song that's an entirely original Ladino song where I went back to English for one verse.
Sure. But that's a tradition in Ladino also, is the macaronic songs with the Turkish verse and the Balkan verse.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do feel like I understand the fear that we all have who care about tradition of doing things that are too different when in the most like formative stage, you're kind of just trying to tell people about the tradition. But I do feel like it's such an act of hope to say, well, we did this with Turkish and Ladino. We did this also with like Serbo-Croatian and Ladino, or Arabic and Ladino. There are all these, this song exists in this language and it exists in this language. And so here's me kind of being like, well, I'm living in an Anglophone environment. And so I like to play around with both those things. And that also helps people at the audience connect, the storytelling in between the songs, having bits of English sometimes popping out of the songs. Right. It helps people not feel that they're only dealing with something exotic, which is important.
Yeah, and if you look at other endangered languages, I mean, things like Breton and Plattdeutsch and all these languages across Europe, there's young people doing rap in all of those languages, and all kinds of new musical styles that are being applied to them.
Completely.
So why not Ladino?
And there's also so much new things that are being done. Like, I've looked at so many Native American languages in the U.S. and how there are standardizations that are happening in order to, Ladino has had that just in the last several decades, that we've standardized our spelling system. It drives people completely nuts, and everybody's always like arguing about what was chosen. And obviously you have to be able to read Rashi script and Solitreo and maybe even Arabic or modern Hebrew or whatever in order to really, and you also have to be able to read ridiculous spellings in Latin alphabet in order to go back.
Right.
But when people are writing an email now in Ladino, there's a spelling system, and that's happened in a lot of languages in order to make it something that we can continue to do in the modern era.
Sure.
Yeah, and we're really lucky that this standardization has been done by native speakers, so that we know that it isn't a language that died and then was revived. It's a language that has continued. It's super endangered, but the continuation has happened without losing access to that world.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Very cool. So you mentioned a couple of artists along the way who also do Ladino music. Are there folks you would recommend that our audience seek out?
Well, I have lots of friends that do different, like very different things from me. Susana Bejar, who was here last year, is a wonderful Ladino singer, originally from Havana in Cuba, which is really has been an important place for Sephardic culture historically. My friend Sarah Aroesti, who especially, she does so much work with children's music and has all these books, which I actually just bought because I'm expecting my first child and I want her to have these Ladino books. And Jack and Janet Assim, who I mentioned. There's a lot of great musicians that are in other scenes, like in the world of classical music, and the world of more traditional music. There's also people that are really outside of the Sephardic community who really probably don't know a lot about the tradition. A lot of them are like from the Iberian Peninsula countries, like either Portugal or Spain, but they're making beautiful versions of traditional music in Ladino. And there's just lots of different things out there. There's some great other musicians in the U.S. that are doing things. So there's a lot of people doing a lot of different interesting work in Ladino.
Great. And I'll mention that there are concerts and interviews with Susana Bejar and Flori Jagoda on the Library of Congress website. So if you're seeing this, you can search our website for more of that kind of
And
music.
actually, I would say that Flori, she has many albums that you can find on Spotify, but the best Flori are the live YouTubes that exist of concerts she did with Folklife Center.
Yeah.
And those are, because in those she was a great live performer, and you get her storytelling in between each song. And I have learned and taken so much from listening to her talk about her songs. And, even just this last week, I did 10 concerts for Carnegie Hall's Musical Explorers program. So about, I don't know, probably 15,000 children have learned one of Flori's songs and one traditional song in Ladino.
Amazing.
And some of how I chose the song, I was really like, I want them to learn this song, but Flori had a lot of life cycle songs. So she wrote a lot of songs that were for a holiday. Mm-hmm. And I thought, I don't know, like, can we put this as part of the syllabus if it's for Passover? And then I watched these videos of her from the Folklife Center when she was an NEA fellow, and there she was performing all of her life cycle songs at random times of year. And she would say, this is for this holiday, but here's your chance to get to hear it and to learn a little bit about the holiday and how Sephardic people particularly practiced it, which is kind of in the lyrics of the song,
Yeah, so there's that, and there's also the fact that a good song is still a good song at the wrong time of year.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, it can.
Which is really important because we're
Yeah.
not celebrating every one of these holidays anymore. Passover is still a big deal, but there's a lot of music that's been lost because we've stopped celebrating certain holidays.
Right.
So it's good to find the song anyway.
So you have invoked the word nerd, and
That's true.
you
I'm
are
proud.
you are also now earning a PhD at Harvard. Tell us about the the ethnomusicology program and the sort of process of pursuing this degree.
Well, you know a lot about the process, I would say. It really all came from, maybe a little of it was in my past studying with ethnomusicologists in my undergrad. But for years and years and years, I was like, I'm not going to become an academic. Like, I'm a performer.
Right.
And I still consider myself to be a performer. And that's what I do, like a lot every year, and a recording artist. But when I did this Fulbright, my plan was to just take this one class. And my mentor there said, why not do a whole certificate? Why not consider doing a master's degree? So I spent like the year studying. I took several other classes in French, which is not even close to my first language, and I was not fluent in at all. But I really enjoyed being in those classes anyway, and I thought, I love this way more. I didn't realize that I had been doing ethnographic research. We nerdy people call the process of learning new songs and interviewing older people or anybody really about what they're doing, we call it ethnography. And I didn't know that. I'd just been doing that as a folk musician all my life. Like I would be at a jam, I'd be 12, I'd go backstage. I'd go to some concert that I was really excited to go to, and then I'd go backstage with my tape recorder, and I'd say, can you play me your favorite tune and tell me about it? And because I guess I was precocious and like ridiculous, I was 12 or 13, right. They would do it, which is crazy to me now that I'm an adult musician, and I'm like, wow, they were on tour and it was probably so tiring, and here's this 12-year-old that's like, can you play me your favorite tune? But I was doing ethnography, I didn't know. And so when I finished my year in Paris, I had the chance of staying there, but I also decided to apply to Wesleyan, which has a really important ethnomusicology program for that master's degree. And I got in, so I did that. That was a trial. And part of it was to see, can I tour and do a master's degree at the same time, which I did. And then I thought, I really want to do this, but I want to change my direction. I'm really hoping to be studying Sephardic musical identity, maybe in Latin American communities where there's been not as much research done on their connection to Sephardic culture and heritage. And so I decided to apply to other places, and I'm getting to do my PhD at Harvard, likely with Alejandro Madrid, who's an amazing musicologist in Latin American music. And it is a really challenging thing to balance all of this stuff, but I think the thing that keeps it working is just that it's all connected to itself, and it feels like one thing at best feeds the other.
Yes.
I do some research, and if it doesn't go into something I'm writing academically, it might go into a song I'm creating, or a story that I tell on stage, or I learn a story and I tell it briefly on stage, but then I really delve into it in my writing. And it's just really, I'm just touched to be able to do all of this work in connection.
Yeah, it's nice when there are those connections between, the different parts of your intellectual.
And then you don't get completely burnt out,
right.
Because people that are nerds in these fields, music, performance, or academic work, there's a burnout that happens. And I feel like I'm definitely exhausted a lot, but I'm never uninspired.
Yeah, amazing. Well, we are, as you know, presenting this concert in collaboration with the Weitzman Museum of American Jewish History. I know you've worked with the Weitzman before. Talk a little bit about your connection in the past with them.
I had the chance to play a concert specifically at the Weitzman. I was particularly touched because Flori Jagoda's daughter actually recorded an intro to my concert, and I think she asked to hear the music first. So that was very touching. But it's always, I play very often for audiences that have they're not Jewish audiences even. So I'm often performing my music for people that know very little about Jewish culture in general. Sometimes I'm at like a bluegrass festival, like singing an entire Sephardic music concert there, or I'm like in, Wisconsin playing at like a big library venue for like an audience where almost nobody is connected. Yeah. So it's always really special to perform at these venues that really have that as a central thing, and that that they appreciate, and that they're trying to shine a light on the diversity and the kind of the wider cultural Jewish existence, like of culture and of language. And the Weitzman is like a place where that's happening. And Dan, who's at the Weitzman, is a great supporter of all kinds of Jewish culture and Jewish arts programming. And it's just really important, especially now, for us to be able to say, like, Jewish culture is bigger and more interesting and more diverse and more long-lasting than, like, the things that you read in the news or, like, whatever. That this precedes that, and, Sephardic culture will continue on afterwards. So.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So this is the point in the interview where I ask, is there anything I didn't ask about that you wanted to tell people?
Oh my my gosh. I knew that I'd get to this question, and I don't think so. I feel like maybe I've talked too much. But thank you so much.
Well, we don't think you have talked too much, but thank you so much, Lily Henley, for this interview. And for those of you watching, if you're seeing this interview isolated on the Library of Congress website, remember there's a concert that it goes with. So check out the concert as well with Lily Henley and her trio on the Library of Congress website.
Thank you so much.